So thank you for having me. You can turn this down a little bit. So it's my pleasure to be here. I took an extra day of my trip to come here earlier to speak last night on dinosaurs, and today we're going to speak on can scientists believe in God? Obviously, in a system where science is presented as fact and where creation is presented as a belief, it's almost like two antitheses, two opposite ideas. Stephen Gould tried to get around this by saying there are two domains that are separate, but it's not true that there are two domains separate. You cannot separate the creator from his creation. And so we'll get into that. It's not a reality. It's not possible to do. And so there is always going to be a place where two thoughts are going to hit, and that's not because of the evidence. It's because the idea of a humanistic approach to science, where you've eliminated the creator from creation that you're studying, automatically causes you an issue. It makes you come up with stories that don't make any sense. And so, when I was doing my master's, my bachelor's and master's degree, I was probably well, in my plant science department, I was the only Christian. In Quebec, where I come from, there's only 0.8% Christian. So it's less than in Japan per capita. It's a mission field. And you may not realize it, but it's the same ratio in France. France has only 0.8% to 1% Christian, evangelical Christian. There are lots of ex-Catholics, but they are Christian. And so you have a mission field right beside here. I mean, England's becoming more and more like that gradually. But the French world hasn't been affected by the big revivals of Wales, etc., etc. And so, in fact, I am the main speaker in the French world. I do more talks than anybody else in French in the world. Not because I do a lot of talks, just because there are hardly anybody speaking. And so there's a very big need. And that's why I have some DVDs I did here in English. We filmed them last year at Kensington Temple in London with Colin Dye. But I normally don't have DVDs in English. I normally have 28 DVDs in French, because people need the information even if they speak another language. And so for me, the whole creation evolution is a mission field. Now you'll notice that as soon as you get outside the walls of this church, the questions are not why did the angels Jacob saw going up and down, why did they use a ladder if they had wings? No, that's not going to be a question that they're going to ask you. Right? They're going to ask you questions like, how do you explain Neanderthal? Who created God? Prove that God exists. They're going to ask you those type of questions. Most of them do not involve directly interpretation of Scripture at all, and most Christians are not equipped to answer it. To such an extent that it's sort of like we put our youth through Sunday school, and I have nothing against Sunday school. We have to do Sunday school. They do years of Sunday school, and within 1 year of college, 75% of youth from Christian families will never come back to the church. Within 1 year, this is documented in the U.S., 75% of our youth are being lost in the U.S. Now, I'm not saying it's the same here. I don't know what the numbers are here, but it wouldn't surprise me, seeing as you have a declining church environment, that you have an even faster declining youth environment. And that's because the church is not answering the questions that are outside this wall in the church and getting people prepared. When the youth in Quebec, when they go to college, it's like a junior college system, so it's like a high school, and then there's 2 years of preparation college, and then there's university. In that preparation college, you have philosophy classes. And invariably, the philosophy teacher, who's never a Christian, will take on Christianity and say, is anybody a Christian here? Does anybody believe in God? And you're put on the spot. How many of our youth can actually answer that question? I'm sad to say few. And so they lose out, and they feel bad, and it's not all their fault. Some of it's our fault, because as a church we haven't trained them to answer the 15 questions that are outside this church. I've been speaking, done over 1,000 talks, spoken over 25 years. I can tell you there's only 15 questions that we get outside the walls of the church. Every once in a while you get the more rare one, but it's always the same ones. I'm sure the pastor can say, it's always the same ones over and over again. So if we trained up our youth and trained up ourselves to be able to answer those questions, we can get past that mask and start talking about the real things, like who is this God? You know, I spoke in Nice in France, and there were mostly non-Christians there, of course. And after I'd spoken, the second question was, well, who is this God? That is exactly where this discussion is supposed to lead. It's not a question of who's right or who's wrong. It's who is this God? So, can a scientist believe in God? I think a scientist really has no choice. Lord Kelvin, now if you go to the Needles, you'll have a little monument out there, Marconi, and it talks about Lord Kelvin, William Thomson, well-known physicist from England. He was like the Einstein. Before Einstein, he's the English Einstein. And in fact, he was very much against the interpretations of long ages of the Earth. And until he died in 1905, evolution from a geologic perspective couldn't really get feet to take off. But he said, if you think strongly enough, you will be forced by science to believe in God. So obviously science isn't an issue where belief in God is concerned. Now, some people on the internet, they put up things like this. You're trying to install Christianity 4.0, but a scientific method process is currently active on your computer. Please disable scientific method before continuing. So they get this idea as if Christianity is not compatible with scientific method. No, what's not compatible with scientific method is imaginations. And we'll see that in a moment. There's an issue with that. It's not the Christianity side. This is just a series I have of a series of 6 talks that I did in Kensington Temple. Everything from the evolution of man to prove that God exists. Part of these questions that you get, global flood, evangelism in the 21st century. I can tell you this is, I think, and everybody has their way to evangelize. Billy Graham, great evangelist, fills stadiums. But how many of those people are still with the Lord 2 years later? It's a known issue. When I come back to the churches, invariably I see the people, and now I'm getting older, so I actually see second generation people where the parents have come to the Lord in my meetings and their children have come to the Lord in my meetings. And they stay in the Lord because the approach is one of come let us reason together. Isaiah 1:18. So God, let's say I prove of God, said evidence of global flood is man and evolved ape, dating, how old is the earth, evangelism in the 21st century. I've had the opportunity of leading over 8,000 people to the Lord through creation conferences. Now, it's not glory to me, it's the Holy Spirit that does the work. In fact, I'm up here speaking to you, and that's a miracle in the sense that when I was young, I played trumpet since I was young, and I'd go into competitions, and I was so nervous that they put too much vibrato. But it wasn't too much vibrato, so I was trying to keep my hands steady. so the Lord has grown me out of that. So it's sort of a miracle. But the Lord will use the most incapable people to do His work. In fact, I think when we're incapable, it's when He has the most opportunity to do His work. Can everybody understand my accent? Am I speaking too fast? Is that okay? All right. Faith evidence. The Bible is the authoritative Word of God. It is sufficient to know the universe's history. Matthew 22:37 says, love God with all your heart, soul, and what? Mind. So God didn't tell us to leave our brain outside the door of the church when we walk in. The Lord has not created a universe that appears to contrast with His Word. Now, okay, and of course Isaiah 1:18 says, come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be like wool. So even God tells us we're to come to salvation through an understanding. Not just through emotion. God created emotions. Emotions are good. I worship with the worship team. Great worship team, obviously professionals, and you don't always get that opportunity. Some of the churches in Quebec, the lady in the room who sings the loudest is usually the most off key. That's like this piercing voice. It's like, anyway, that's not the case here. Everybody's really good. But there's lots of zeal when they do that. They mean well. I'm not putting it in the right direction. Okay, so we have the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is totally scientific. It responds to everything we know about scientific modeling. In the beginning, what's it saying? There is a beginning. This concept saved science. This was Jackie, J-A-K-I, wrote a doctorate on how the Christianity saved science. Because what happened was, as knowledge was progressing, and in Europe and in the developing countries, why didn't India had great architecture. Chinese had calculus equivalent. Well, our area of calculus, but Chinese had developments in the area of gunpowder, had developments in the area of warfare, even in architecture. You had the Muslims were coming up strong in the 13th century with mathematics. Why did Europe take over? One reason, Christianity, because in Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, you have a beginning and an end. You don't have reincarnation. You don't have a cycle. You don't have astrology. Astrology, by the way, is what killed Islam science. Because they went with an astrologer in the 13th century. With astrology, you can't tell what's happening. Do you understand the problem? But if you have a beginning and an end, you can do science because things happen the same way each time. So in the beginning, so there's a beginning and then it says God. So God's there before the beginning. We just answered who created God. God is not made of matter. He does not need a creator. Matter needs a beginning. And if you don't have matter, you don't have time. God's outside of time. There's no such thing as a beginning and end when you're outside of time. It's a nonsensical question. It's not a question that makes sense who created God. In fact, normally when they ask you who created God, that's because you've given the evidence that there is a God. They don't have a choice to accept it. And they try to get around it by saying, well, who created God? As if that annulled the evidence that God existed, which it does not.
Yeah.
Everybody following me?
Yeah.
I'm giving you all kinds of little bits of information so you can go out there and do your stuff. Alright, now Jesus says in Mark 10:6, and I love this verse, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Who's he talking about?
God.
Who's God talking? Jesus talking about who's the male and female he's talking about? Adam and Eve in Genesis. Beginning of creation.
Yeah.
Now, do you think Jesus was lying? Okay, that wasn't very big, no. What have you been teaching them about? Do you think Jesus was lying? No! Oh yeah, I know, you're just concentrating because of my accent. So Jesus is saying Adam and Eve are there when? At the beginning. Okay, so we just destroyed all this concept of Big Bang, evolution, billions of years old Earth.
Yeah.
Or Jesus is lying.
That's right.
And God wrote it in the 6th commandment. You know, there's part of the Bible that we can't even interpret. We just have to accept it. The 10 commandments of God weren't even written by Moses. They were the hand of God wrote them. It's not like the 10 opinions of Moses.
That's right.
And in it, he wrote the 4th commandment, in 6 days God creates the heaven, the earth, the seas, and all that is contained therein. Is there anything left? The heavens, the earth, the seas, and everything that's in it. There's nothing else in the cosmos. So it's part of the 10 commandments that God created in 6 days. And we have this whole discussion going, did God do it in 6 days? Wait a second. It's the 10 commandments, folks.
Yeah.
You don't believe that, you have another issue. Now, and Jesus confirms it. Are we having fun yet?
Yeah.
Okay. And you say, oh, but science. What does science say? The Big Bang says there was nothing and nothing exploded. What? That doesn't fit any modeling that I know of. You start with nothing and nothing exploded. That's not a model. That's fairy tales. That's magic. That's not reality. In the beginning, God, a force, an intelligence, creates, and love, of course, but you don't get that out of the verse, creates the universe of matter that fits scientific modeling. Okay, our Milky Way, I don't know with all the lights you can see that, but can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of stars. So in the cosmos we have galaxies, and you have billions of galaxies, and then you have billions of stars in each of the galaxies. That's a lot. Okay? When Abraham was counting the stars, he could probably only see about 1,200, 300 stars with his eyes. Well, now we know there's more and more and more. There's more. There's lots of stuff out there, and you know, in science we have what's called the law of causality. When an effect happens, it has to be caused by a cause that comes before the effect, and that's big enough to produce the effect. The universe is an effect, so the cause has to become before the universe, and it has to be big enough to cause this universe. The universe can't cause itself. Well, here, so they look back in what they call time. They look back in time. The Hubble telescope looks into a hole for 2 weeks. And they say, if the Big Bang's right, and you start off with just gas, and then it starts expanding or inflating, and then you have the development of stars, protostars, stars, then stars and galaxies, and so they have to all group together, right? Because it's grouped together. So if you look back in time, you should just see the beginning of this. There should be just maybe some stars forming a couple of galaxies. Oh, but the problem is, when we look back in time, we see 100,000 million, I don't know how many galaxies. You can see all these points of galaxies. They are completely formed. They're spiral galaxies completely formed, just like God says in Genesis 1:14, where he says, God puts the stars in the sky. They're all formed. They say, we don't understand it. It doesn't fit the model. Of course it doesn't fit the model. It's the wrong model. I've got the right model. It's Genesis. Oh, you can't believe it, Genesis. Why not? The humanist scientists will say any day of the week, there's been a worldwide flood on Mars. Good. I think there was one on Earth. No, there was never one on Earth. You said there's a worldwide flood on Mars. Yeah, no problem. Why is there a problem with a worldwide flood on Earth? Oh, just because you don't like the Bible? Maybe. This is our galaxy. So you have walls of galaxies. Well, here's the problem. So if you start with a universe that's gas, matter starts creating by some magical process, and then it starts expanding. Well, then the matter should be uniform all over the universe. But it's clumpy. It's lumpy. Well, how do you get the energy into lumps? Let me explain. There's a very easy way to show that this is not possible. Everybody recognize that? Coffee. Think, I want one now. All right. Has anybody, when you put a coffee in front of yourself, you don't start all of a sudden dripping ice off your nose because the cup of coffee is absorbing all the heat in the room. Right? When you put coffee, the coffee loses its heat as the heat goes out towards the coal. But in the galaxies, they're asking you to believe the opposite can occur, that all the heat of the universe is going into clumps. But that's not how it works. Heat expands outward and evens out the temperature, but that's not what we see in the universe. It doesn't work. The humanistic modeling, but the Bible modeling works. Richard Dawkins, well-known atheist from Britain, he says, biology is the study of complicated things that have the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Richard Dawkins, wait a second. You're saying they're designed with a purpose. Oh no, I said they just have the appearance of it. Normally a scientist says when you see something, it's because that's what it is. It has the appearance of being designed probably because it has been designed. Let's look at this. Now we're going to a galaxy. There are galaxies in the universe. Let's look at a galaxy inside ourselves. The DNA code. I love the DNA code. I sit with engineers all day. And I had an atheist engineer from Holland in front of me at supper about a year ago. And I was sitting there discussing with him, and he says he's an atheist. And he doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know that I'm a creationist or anything, right? He just said, I don't know how we got into the discussion. He says atheist. I said, yeah, but when you have information, he said, information has to come from outside the system. He said, what do you mean? Well, I said, if you have a computer, it has a code in it, a program. But the computer doesn't program itself. It was programmed from the outside. When you have a car, it's full of information, but information was programmed into it from outside. The car doesn't. So I said, so you have the DNA code, it's full of information. The information has to come from outside. He was silent for a while. He said, I never thought about that. So I think he's not an atheist anymore. But, well, Richard Dawkins got stuck with that question. He said, extraterrestrials planted us here. What? So the extraterrestrials are intelligent, so you now believe in intelligent design? Okay. So, DNA code. What do we have in DNA code? Just rapidly, I'm not going to give you a course on DNA, but you have codes inside your cells that have to get outside the cell have to get outside the nucleus with their information. So you have a transcription that happens, so that because you don't take the code out of the nucleus. So there's another code that gets plated on, and it copies it, and then it moves it outside the nucleus. Now so there's transcription and translation. It means there are 3 languages involved, and they have to be done perfectly. Otherwise, everything breaks apart in your body, as this is going on millions of times a second. Now, I'm going to show you just a little video of this, and we're going to try to get the sound right. It's just a 3-minute video, but it explains to you, after you watch this, you'll see why a creationist must believe in God. Okay? That's how the DNA works. Let's try to get the sound right on this.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism.
For some reason, it's maybe I'll put it on the screen. See if we do it this way. Sorry about that. It's not, for some reason the animation is jumping. Let me read it over here. See if I can do it this way. As you'll know, my screen is in French.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process
As far as we know, there's no music in the
a
cell.
molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nucleopore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. Chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
A little hard to not believe there was a creator. 7 times they mentioned machines, sub-machines. And keep in mind the DNA has to have the code for all those machines so it can work itself. So it's impossible to not, Romans says they are willingly ignorant of that there's a creator. You have to actually deny it forcibly because naturally looking at what's around you. That's why in high school in Quebec, they say 7 times in bold in the manual, evolution is a fact, evolution is a fact. They don't say like mitochondria are a fact or DNA is a fact. We know that's a fact. But we don't know evolution is a fact because everything would point us to the idea that this was created with intelligence. And the thing about intelligence and the creation is that it's a message of hope to a world that is without hope. Because if you are just a blip in time of the cosmic graph of time and there's no reason for your existence, then where is your hope? Where I am from, in the center of Quebec, Victoria, near Victoriaville, is one of the highest suicide rates in all of Canada. There's no hope. But if we are created with a reason, because the Creator doesn't create with no reason, that is a strong and powerful message of hope. It is a light in the darkness for people to know. And the question really isn't when I see people say, prove that God exists. Most people believe God exists. They don't know if God knows they exist. And that's the message a church is supposed to come to them, saying, God knows you exist. It's impossible. I know the universe is so big, but God knows. He sent His only Son so that you would be in relationship with Him. What a powerful message. Now, some of the other things, just we got a couple more minutes? I'm sure I've gone over 20 minutes. I don't know what we are. just a few more minutes, 5 more minutes, okay?
Yeah. Go.
No one's walking out. But they warned me that night. They'd like tackle me off the stage if I kept going around 20 minutes. I'm sure we're at 20 minutes now. Okay, just a couple of evidences, just some quick evidences. Bees. 60% of our food comes from, if you don't have bees, you just lose 50% of your food chain. So how do bees know where things are, how many bees to send to get it? Very, very interesting. They have this dance they do. And with this dance, they communicate distance, direction, and quantity of food. Let me explain this. First of all, for distance, they take a mental picture. They have little tiny brains, bees, but they have enough. And they take a picture of their path, their flight, where they're going. And they analyze the pictures, and then they come back to the hive, and then they do this dance where they do this figure 8 that you see here. It's like this. And so they go up and down against the hive, and the other bees watch. And based on the number of rotations they do over time. So as you know, bees have little watches, and they set their count. Oh, they don't? Oh. Well, we actually don't know how they count time, but they do count time. And what we've observed is 100 meters is if the bee does 10 number 8s in 15 seconds, the bees watching know that's 100 meters away. If he does 3 revolutions in 15 seconds, it's 3 kilometers away. And they can calculate everything in between. Now, just because you know how far away, you still have an issue because you have 360 degrees. Where do you go? And if you don't have enough energy to do 3 kilometers, you won't get back to the hive with the nectar. So, they have distance. The distance is the angle they do the dance based on the hive against the hive. So the hive is like this. So they will adjust the angle according to where the sun is on the horizon. And the bees watch that angle. They do a little bit of trigonometry. And all bees are good at trigonometry. And they sit there and they say, okay, it's 35 degrees southwest. All right, we have 2 kilometers to go. I'm watching that little dance going. I'm counting the number 8s. And on top of that, I'm measuring the angle. And I know when I get out of that hive, I know where to go. Now, we're missing one thing. How many bees to send? You don't send the whole hive if there's only one clover leaf, one clover plant. You got a problem, right? So how do we know what's the intensity of the dance? So they move their back end, they go like this. And as they go up really fast, and the more intense it is, the more bees you send. Who exactly teaches the bees this? How did that information get in there? Could you possibly evolve that? In Job 12:7-9 says, now ask the beasts and they will teach you, and the birds of the air they will tell you, and speak to the earth and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? Now, let's finish with the ant. Little red ants. Okay, they carry these big leaves on top of them. What you may not know is these ants, they harvest the leaves, but they do not eat them. Okay, what do? They chew the leaves for the benefit of the mushrooms. They grow mushrooms inside their anthill. Okay, they eat the mushrooms. So they bring in the leaves, the mushrooms, the bacteria, they grow on the leaves, and then they eat the mushrooms. Well, that's pretty cool. They fertilize the leaves with a anal liquid, give a little bit of fertilizer. Now, if they harvest the plant that is toxic for the mushrooms, the mushrooms release a chemical signal, and the ants somehow know not to gather this type of leaf in the future. So you have information going between 2 completely different realms in the biological world, and that they understand, and information going between the ants themselves. But we don't often see ants do like general assemblies of ants. They get together and speak about things. They get a speaker up front and say, don't take this leaf. But they communicate it, and they won't go back and take the leaf. Now, if the mushroom, and we notice that these mushrooms, if you put them outside the anthill, they're all dead. They get pulverized by other mushrooms. So how come they're okay inside the anthill? So the mushrooms need the ants to survive, and the ants need the mushrooms to survive. It's called symbiosis. So the ants protect the mushrooms from parasitic mushrooms because Ascobopsis, because a bacteria covers the ant. The ants that are not the ants that won't get the leaves. There are ants that are specific to farming the mushrooms. They're covered with a bacteria that kills all the other bacteria except the mushrooms. Is this cool? This is cool. At the first sign of infection, even if something gets infected, all the ants stop what they're doing, grab the mushrooms, and take them to another place. That's how can you explain that except to say there's a creator behind those ants? Proverbs 6:6 says, Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Yes. Finally, Chabazon, Switzerland. So these are the Alps. I was up there in the Alps a few years ago. I took a picture of the cow, but I also took a picture of this. So this has started interesting me because what does it show? It shows a mountain. I don't know if you can see that in the room. But this mountain, if you follow these strata, this mountain has been sandwiched 180 degrees. How do you do that slowly? Because if this mountain slowly came to that position, first of all, there would be all kinds of cracks and faulting, and secondly, there would be no fossils in here because of the heat produced. But in fact, there are tons, this is the Jura. There's tons of fossils, where we get the word Jurassic from. And there are all kinds of fossils in here, and this has to have been done rapidly before it had become rock. So you had all these layers during the flood that were put on this rock, and then a force, a continental movement force, came on the side and sandwiched this mountain. And then there were more events even afterwards as strata were laid down on top of this event. This happened while it was underwater. They say that maybe 60% of the Alps is missing and we don't know where it is. Because if we follow the strata up here, we don't know where the rest is. If we look in the Grand Canyon, the problem here is that you have this interbedding. So you have this rock is supposed to be half a billion years old. This rock's supposed to be 1 billion years old, and yet the rock interstrat, it goes in like fingers like this. So how can this one be half a billion, this one 1 billion, half a billion, billion? No, that doesn't make sense. You're either going to go older to younger, or it's all the same age. So something's wrong with 1 billion and half billion, because they have to be the same age because they're interbedding. Everybody can follow?
Yeah.
It's okay, it's not too complicated? Okay, look at this. This is in Kentucky. So you're on a roadside where you see strata. Okay, and strata here. So you can sort of, where's the erosion? So the question I have is we look at strata all over the place, and we don't see erosion between the strata. Strata is supposed to be laid down, and then you have another event in maybe 10,000 years between. 10,000 years, all kinds of things change. You have landslides every couple of years, you have chines that are created, you have all kinds of things. It changes the countryside, but when we look at strata, there's no erosion. Why is there no erosion? My question is always to my colleagues, why? It's not my theory, it's your theory. I know why. Because there was no time for erosion, because it happened during and just after the flood, and flood and post-events that's less than 5,000 years ago. That's why that happened. But you can't, how do you explain that slowly? You can't. So the question is, where's the erosion? You see the problem? You have these strata, there's no erosion. Alright, in the Grand Canyon, which is supposed to be like a cut through of the earth, it's a mile deep, you're supposed to have all these different eras, but that's not true. You only have 3 eras. The Cambrian, Carboniferous, and Permian. They say, well, there's no problem with this, but there is an enormous problem with this. The problem is that there's supposed to be 150 million years between the Cambrian and the Carboniferous here, and there's nothing. Those layers don't exist. How do you get rid of 150 years? 150 million years. And there's no area, there's no trace of the 150 million years. One layer is exactly on top of the other. You can't even put a piece of paper between it. It's like that. Maybe because there never was 150 million years. You understand what I'm saying? Something's wrong with the model. And I could go on and on and on with the pictures of the model. There's no countryside again. You have no erosion between the layers. So things are quick and it happens. Now, what's the effect of this? If you start standing up and saying the truth, if you start asking the questions that I'm starting to ask this morning, what happens? Well, 1 Timothy 1:18-19 says that we have to wage a good warfare, that we're going to be in a fight when we stand up to say the truth. This is true. This lady here, Dr. Nancy Bryson, she loses her job after 24 years. She was 1 year from tenure. 24 years of teaching. No problems. One of the best teachers at Women's Missouri State University. She gets fired because she gave one talk where she questioned evolution. She loses her job. This man here has 4 doctorates. He did the work for 4 doctorates. He has 2 of them. He's written over 300 papers. He's worked on the Human Genome Project. But 2 of his doctorates were refused at the last analysis, not because of the work he did. They said, because you're a Christian and a creationist, we will not give you your doctorate. He's like, well, you could have told me that 4 years ago. You know what I mean? And he's written a book called Slaughter of the Dissidents of over 400 people that have lost their careers, lost their working. In France, the top geneticist in bovine, male bovine sterility, the top geneticist, Andrew Egan, he lost his position at his lab because they found out he was a Christian and creationist. He's still the top geneticist. Now he has to do sales for a company. That's terrible. There's a price to pay. Mark Armitage, I talk about him. He was an American laboratory. This is from a microscope where you're looking at bone cells that are non-fossilized from a triceratops, a dinosaur. Non-fossilized bone cells. He even published in Acta Histochemica, which is the top journal you can publish in cellular histology. The top, you can't go any higher. Normally in science, when you publish, in fact in universities they say, you're supposed to do research, teaching, and publishing. But in reality it's publish, publish, publish. And so that's what really matters, it brings in the money. So he publishes, so that's good. 3 weeks later he's fired. Nothing wrong with his work. The only thing is that he demonstrates that this dinosaur has all kinds of material that's non-fossilized, so this dinosaur could not be 65 million years old. Or 100 million years old in this case. It has to be just a few thousand years old. And the implications apparently are enough to get him fired. I say it's not unfossilized bone and cells and Triceratops horn. Another way to title this is a method by which to quickly lose your job and career at Cal State University. Because that's what happened. That's in court, of course, with religious discrimination. So, what's the issue? Why, if the evidence is so clear, why is it such an issue? Well, the issue is all around this. Where we come from defines where we're going. Our origin defines our future. If we come from Adam, then God creates the absolutes and God sets the rules. He's the creator. The Ten Commandments, you not kill, etc. If an egg is in your past, if you're just a bacterial egg, well then man sets the rules. And that's what man wants to do. He wants to become God. Now the issue with becoming God is that, first of all, we're not good at it. Secondly, what makes my right your right? What makes my wrong your wrong? See, when I was at university in the faculty, we had this discussion about democracy, how democracy was good. I said, really? I say, let's say I'm captured by a tribe of cannibals. Let's have a vote, a democratic vote. Who thinks Lawrence should be lunch? 6 cannibals. Maybe 3, I wouldn't feed 6. So, and then who thinks Lawrence shouldn't be lunch? Lawrence. Is it now right to eat humans? Because democratically it was voted that it was correct? You understand the problem? Relative morality is total anarchy. It can't work. You have to have someone from outside the system who says, this is right and this is wrong. And that's a very encouraging and securing message to have. So this is the big issue. But people like to have moral morality. They don't like the rules God made, maybe. So ultimately, here's the issue. You have creation, God's word is truth. You have this castle, these are Christians. So you have Christians that are asleep. You have Christians that are shooting cannons off nowhere. You have Christians that are shooting other Christians. And you have Christians that are killing the basis, which is Genesis, which is God is creator. They're taking it apart, and they become theistic evolutionists. And then you have Christians that are going after all these issues of abortion, pornography, racism, euthanasia, etc., as they should. Now, if you look at the humanists, and these are always based on evolution, they fire one place, they destroy Genesis. It's all they care about, because they know if they destroy Genesis, everything else crumbles. We don't apparently haven't figured that out, so we keep shooting here, but they keep putting up balloons. But if you take, I know perfectly, you see the solution is this. If I can get it to change size. The solution is this. We take on these issues, but if we take on this issue, everything else falls down and crumbles. So we really need to get knowledgeable. It's why I did the DVDs. It's why you need to get knowledgeable about this subject, to be able to answer those questions, to take off this, because your conversations with your non-Christian friends will become much shorter. It won't take nearly as long when you remove evolution from the mask of evolution will be removed, and then it's a question of heart to heart. Because this mask of evolution is just to defend their heart that's being hurt. Right? We're humans. Scientists are humans also. So you have these experiences at church and religious, you see issues going on, and that heart is the heart issue, and that's what God wants to touch. Remove evolution and there'll be a heart issue. So I hope this morning was something that could encourage you, and that will give you some information. You can go out there and use it. And